Okay, back again with another class. Last week we finished the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis. Again, before we ever study, when you're at home, take some money, put it in your tzedakah box. This way the angels of charity bless our study. And the other thing that we always do, I'll pass this over there. And the other thing we always do is say a blessing, a prayer, that our study may be holy work. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. So before we get into this, I want to explain something that I think is a good thing to remember, why we light a candle, why we say a bracha, and why we give charity. So let me just use this board. Maybe we can go a little bit closer on it. So every Hebrew letter, imagine that there's a line, and every Hebrew letter is either above the line, okay, through the line, or the Hebrew letters are hanging down from it like that, okay? That's how every Hebrew letter is, with one exception, which is the letter Lamed. The letter Lamed starts above the line, goes through it, and goes to the bottom. That's a Lamed. Lamed also means, it has a translation. The name of the letter, Lamed, Lomed or Lilmod, means to study and to teach. And the understanding in Judaism is that when we study, when we teach, we are going from the very lowest world to the very highest. That our study is a sacred activity. It connects us in every way to what is above and what is below. That's why we say a blessing. That's why we give charity. To remember that it's not just studying like you're studying for a test in high school. Actually, it's holy study. And it connects our souls from the very lowest to the very highest level. So I just want to put that out there. Okay. So just to recap a little bit. So we started off, we talked about the Tanakh, we talked about God's name. We talked about the question Ayecha, the question that it means, where are you, that is asked so many times to so many sages. And they all answer, Hineni, I am present. And I contend that every one of us is asked every moment of our lives, where are you? We're asked by God, life, the universe, where are you? Where do you stand? And the people we remember were the people who had the courage, willingness, and ability to say, here I am present. So Judaism is about getting us to the place of being able to say this phrase, Hineni, I am here, I am present. No matter how much the sands below us shift, to be present in every moment, in every space. And our rituals and our teachings and our ceremonies are all to help us be fully present, not just in this moment, but as a result of being really present, being present in all moments. So we went over that. We went over the issues of Adam and Eve and how they came apart, how it was Ha-Adam and then it became Adam and Chava. That in fact, woman did not come from man. They both came from Ha-Adam, the human being. We also call them Adam and Codbone, where they were back to back. They were connected to the rib, and then God separated them. But it was male on one side, female on the other. We talked about Noah, and we talked about Abraham and Hagar, and Abraham and Sarah, and Isaac, and we talked about Ishmael. We talked about Isaac's sons, Esau and Jacob, and the binding. We got through Jacob and his dreams, and the 12 sons and his daughter, and ultimately Joseph, who is exiled by his brothers. They sell him to the Ishmaelites, and ultimately he gets to Egypt and invites everyone back to Egypt. I want to put this in perspective. So scholars, academics believe that Jacob lived sometime around the 14th century before the Common Era. Maybe 15th, maybe a little earlier. And then the book of Shemot, the second book of the Bible, it's not Exodus. It actually is called Shemot, which means names. And it starts talking about what happened after Jacob. And there's this great line that starts in the very beginning. And again, if you have a Tanakh, you should be pulling it out right now so you can study at the same time. I always recommend the Art Scroll Tanakh, the Stone Edition. It's a straight Hebrew to English translation. It's a wonderful translation. If not, then the JPS. But those are really my two favorites, this one especially. Okay? And it has this great line. And the line is, this is in chapter 1, verse 8, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know of Joseph. Now, I want to add one other thing as well. If you're watching on Facebook and you have a question, type it in. If you're watching on YouTube or you're watching as we get it set up, hopefully within the next week on our website, can they type in on YouTube as well? Type in the question or the comment, and that way we can have dialogue about it. I've never been someone who's a fan of teaching by lecturing. So this is all very strange and difficult for me as well, because learning is supposed to have dialogue, or chavruta, with friends. So it says in verse 8, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know of Joseph. Let's recap what happened. Joseph tells Pharaoh, store this food. And Joseph and his people become very, very successful, because when there's a famine, and Pharaoh becomes even more successful, because when there's a famine, they have the food. They have all the grain. They have everything that's needed. So let's just imagine what's going on in the psyche of people at this moment. First year famine hits, and they come up and they say, Pharaoh, we need food. And Joseph's negotiating, and he says, well, I'll give you some food, but you got to give me the next 10% of everything that grows on your land for the next 3 years after the famine, something like that. And by the second, third, fourth, fifth year, parents are willing to do anything to keep their children alive, to keep their family alive. And they effectively become slaves. So they probably don't like Joseph very much, or that Pharaoh very much, right? Because he's rationing out the food, and he's in charge of it, and he's, and Pharaoh is succeeding and starts getting more and more slaves who have sold everything they have in order to be able to get food to feed their children, which, God forbid, any of us would do as well. In chapter 1, verse 8, it says, a new king arose in Egypt who knew not of Joseph. So if we look historically, this is also at the exact shifting point between the 18th and the 20th Egyptian dynasties. There's literally two dynasties that shift between the time of Joseph and what will become Moses. So it's a good guess that some of these people, when they get in power, they were not doing well before. They were slaves, or they had lost their economics, or whatever it might be. Now they're in power. They're probably not such big fans of Joseph's descendants. And so they enslave the Hebrews. The Hebrews become numerous. They're worried that there's going to be a revolution. They enslave them. They build the cities for Pharaoh of Pithom and of Ramses. And this is a really important piece, okay? If we go to chapter 15, or verse 1, chapter 1, verse 15, it says, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the first was Shiphrah and the name of the second was Puah. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women, if you see them on the birth stool, if it's a son, kill him. If it's a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives were in awe of God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt spoke to them. They caused the boys to live. And when the king confronted them, they said, because the Hebrew women are experts before the midwife comes to them to give birth. This is a very important line. The Hebrews, at that point, we're not called Jews, we're called Hebrews. Ivrim means people who cross over. Why are we called Hebrews? Why are we called Ivrim? Because we crossed over the Jordan to get into Egypt in the first place. In a traditional Passover Haggadah, and if you have a teenage son or grandson, or younger than that, it is so important, or older than that too, it's so important to make sure that they know this piece. It is because of the women that we were ultimately released from Egypt. It is because Puah and Shiphrah allowed the Hebrew boys to be born. And it's because of the crying out of the women that God answered the prayers for redemption. It's really important. It's especially important Passover. It's also important to, when young boys are feeling their oaths, or young men are feeling their oaths, to remind them that we're only free because of women. And that's not trying to be politically correct. That's just what it says in the Haggadah. And there's a truth to it. So we need to remember that too. Judaism is actually not patriarchal nor matriarchal. It's partnership. Men have their job, women have their job. And we need to remember that. And we'll go more into that. Remember, a lot of this, we're going through all this biblical stuff so we can get a real good understanding of the history and the foundation. So when we start studying Talmud and Mussar and Kabbalah and all these different things, we understand, especially Talmud, we understand what the root of it all is. That's why we're spending so much time on Torah and Tanakh. Okay? So, they have children. And Pharaoh commands his entire people, this is verse 22, every son that will be born into the river shall you throw him, and every daughter shall you keep alive. And someone from the house of Levi, she gives birth to a son. And she tries to hide him for 3 months. She couldn't hide him any longer. So she puts him in a wicker basket, floats him down the river. And his sister, named Miriam, goes down and watches just to see what happens to the baby. Pharaoh's daughter, or some say niece, is bathing in the river. She cannot have a baby. And she sees the baby in the wicker basket, and she reaches out. And there's even a midrash that says God extended her hand so it would be very, very long so she could reach out. She brings the baby in, and she goes, and she says, to her father or her uncle, Pharaoh, I have a son. I want you to accept him as my son. Now, the problem is Pharaoh wants to listen to his daughter, his niece. But on the other hand, all of his ministers have said that he would be overthrown by a Hebrew. So what does he do? Again, this is our midrash, our oral tradition that is written down, but is the oral tradition a couple thousand years old. And what we're taught is that the ministers devise a test. So they put Pharaoh's golden signet ring over here, and they put a hot coal over here, and they say if the baby picks up the hot coal, he's obviously stupid. Don't have to worry about him overthrowing you. If he picks up your signet ring, that means that he is going to overthrow you, and you must kill him. And so the teaching is that Moses, as a baby, reaches, because this baby becomes called Moses or Moshe, which means he who is drawn from the water, reaches first for the signet ring, but then an angel pushes his hand, so instead he picks up the glowing coal. Now, what do babies do when they pick up something? They put it in their mouth. So he takes the glowing coal and he puts it in his mouth. And as a result, he has a cleft palate or some sort of deformity or some sort of lisp that happens. But he has a speaking impediment that he will have the rest of his life. And so Pharaoh says, okay, he must be stupid. And all the ministers say, okay, he must be stupid. And he ends up being Moshe, and he's raised as a son of Pharaoh. He's raised as a prince. If you want to watch the movie, Prince of Egypt is actually much more accurate in many ways than the Ten Commandments, although we all love the Ten Commandments of Charlton Heston. God bless him. And all those things. So there's slaves in Egypt. And Moses leaves Egypt. He flees Egypt after killing an Egyptian. And he comes to the land of Midian. And here in Midian, he goes to a well, and there he meets the beautiful daughters of Jethro, Yithro. Let's go back. Where is Rebecca met? By Abraham's servant? At a well. Where is Rachel met? At a well. We constantly find that it's at a well, at a watering place. This pattern will recapitulate itself, will repeat itself over and over, that the Besheret, the loved ones, find each other at a well. And so he finds the family of Yithro, and he becomes one of them, and he marries his wife, who's the daughter of Jethro. And we're going to go down to chapter 3, that he's shepherding, because Yithro is a shepherd, and he's going towards the Mount Horeb. He arrives at the mountain, and an angel of Hashem appeared to him in a blaze of fire from amid the bush. And he saw the bush was burning in the fire, but the bush was not consumed. Moses thought, I will turn aside now and look at this great sight. Why will the bush not be burned? This is the famous burning bush. One of the most misunderstood passages in Torah. Often we hear this and we make the assumption that, magically this bush was burning and he saw it. It was burning especially for him. But in fact, that's actually not what happened. He saw the essence, the life energy of it. It was always burning. He just paused long enough so he could perceive it. Most of us, most of the time, don't see the magic in life. It doesn't matter if our back is to a tree, we're facing the ocean, if we're in temple, if we're at a football game, if we're around other people, whatever it may be, we only see shallow images. If we pause, we can see the beauty of things, the real beauty. We can say Hineni, we can be present. And that's what Judaism is about. So we can all be like Moses and pause. When I would teach this section, I was teaching at Loyola Marymount many years ago, I would try and teach this section out in a huge quad. Now, there's a huge sunken garden quad at Loyola Marymount, if you've been there. It's huge. And we'd be out there, and the kids walk by and through it every day, multiple times a day, because the dorms are on one side and all the classes are on the other. And I would sit there with a class of 25, 30 students and say, okay, how many times have you guys walked across this lawn? And they'd say, hundreds of times. I'd say, great, how many palm trees are over there? And never, not one of them could tell me how many palm trees. They couldn't say there were 8 palm trees. They had never perceived. Life is subtle. God doesn't shout, God whispers. And it's so important for us to really listen. This is why the watchword of our faith is Shema Yisrael. Listen. We hear, but we don't listen. Moses listened and he paused. And out from this bush came God's voice. Any voice, any bush we can hear God in. Rabbi Nachman teaches that before we can say our morning blessings, we should go out into nature and listen to the song of the plants and the animals. But we have to pause. We have to perceive, not just quickly go by. And most of us, unless we're very, very young, or very, very old, we don't do that pausing often enough, do we? So Moses perceives this burning bush, and God speaks to him from this bush. And we have the line. God says to him, Moses, Moses. And Moses replies, Hineni, here I am. Says, don't come closer. Take your shoes from your feet. I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. I've seen the affliction my people have. I'm going to dispatch you to get them out of Egypt. And Moses is very recalcitrant. Okay, he's very, very recalcitrant. He complains that he can't speak well, because again, he picked up that glowing coal as a child. He complains, well, what am I going to say when they say, what's your name? God says, and this is a mistranslation often in almost every Christian Bible. When we get to this verse where Moses says, who am I that I should go out? And Moses says to him, what shall I say to them when they say to me, what is his name? God answers with a phrase, Ehyeh asher Ehyeh, often translated as I am that I am. That is an improper translation. The appropriate translation, Ehyeh, is in future tense, is I shall be that I shall be, or I will be that I will be. Not I am, it's I will be. There's a subtle distinction that it is always in motion. God is always growing. God is infinite. God is always shifting in so many different ways. But yet at the same time, God is present. Ehyeh asher Ehyeh. I shall be as I shall be. And so he sends Moses on out. And Moses goes back to Egypt and he says, I want you to, excuse me, I'm maybe getting a text, so please forgive me, which I would have to take. And Moses comes back and he doesn't believe that they're gonna listen to him. So God says, I'm gonna have Aaron speak for you, and I'm gonna give you this staff. And he picks up the staff, and the staff is magical, for lack of a better term. He casts it on the ground and becomes a snake. And Moses realizes that God changes it. It is his staff. It is part of him. And so he sends off Moses. He says that Aaron will also be your voice, your mouthpiece. And they go. And they come to Pharaoh. He goes back to Egypt, and he and his brother Aaron go to Pharaoh. And they have this challenge, and they say, let God says, let our people out. And Pharaoh says, I don't know who this God is. I'm not going to listen to his voice. He makes it even more difficult on them. More and more difficult. And God keeps reassuring Moses. And we have this concept of 4 times. This is now in chapter 6. That God reassures Moses. And it's for each of those 4 times that we drink a cup of wine in the Passover Haggadah and the Passover Seder. That's why you have 4 cups of wine and a hidden 5th. Also corresponds to the 4 letters of God's name and to the 4 worlds in our mystical understanding, the 4 worlds of the Mekabalim, of the Kabbalah, world of making, of Asiyah, of forming, of Yetzirah, of creating, of Bria, and of emanating, of Atzilut. And we'll get to that, don't worry. And so Moses goes and he speaks to Pharaoh, and he's very hesitant. But he casts down a snake, and Pharaoh's ministers cast it into a snake, but Moses, the snake, eats all their snakes. And God says to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn. And so we have the first plague. Moses goes out and he makes the Nile turn to blood. We then have 10 plagues, and we cast them, we call them out every Pesach. We take a little bit of wine from our wine cup and we put it on our napkin. Please, when you get the Pesach in a number of months, in 6 months, please, when you take your plague out, don't lick your finger. Okay, just wipe it. You don't want to be putting, God forbid, the plagues in our mouths. And we have frogs, and we have lice. And it goes through all of them. And constantly what happens is Pharaoh, his heart softens, and then God hardens his heart, and another plague comes. And ultimately we have boils and hail. We have locusts. We have a darkness that cannot be seen. And then we have the 10th plague, the plague of the death of the firstborn. These 10 plagues correspond to the 10 commandments. They correspond to the 10 utterances God says when he creates the universe. They correspond to the 10 sefirot and 10 energy centers. And most importantly, on a historical level, they each correspond to a different deity in the Egyptian pantheon of mythology. Okay, so the Nile is a god. And when he puts blood in the Nile, that's saying that Hashem, that God, is greater than the God that is the Nile. It goes through all of these different gods, ultimately ending up with the god of the dead. I always forget if that's Anubis or Osiris, but it's one of them, I think. But it, again, that God is greater than all of their Egyptian pantheons. And it's really important to realize that what he's doing is he's showing not the Egyptians and not Pharaoh. He's showing the Hebrews. See, one of the challenges is that the Hebrews had adopted the Egyptian pantheon. Yeah, they still believed in Yod-Keh, Vav-Keh. They still believed in Hashem. But they also believed in all these Egyptian gods, and they had adopted those practices. The things they had not done is they still did circumcision, and they still gave them names. Hebrew names. And they adopted all these beliefs. The problem is that before the Hebrews could leave Egypt, they had to let go of a belief in all these Egyptian deities. And so what do? What does God do? Each of these plagues casts down a different one of these Egyptian deities. So in many ways, the plagues are not for the Egyptians. For the Hebrews. Since it says repeatedly that God softens and hardens Pharaoh's heart, God could have just softened Pharaoh's heart to begin with and all of them could have gone out, but they weren't ready because they still were adopting, they were still holding on to their Egyptian beliefs. Plagues more than for the Hebrews, more than for the Egyptians, were for the Hebrews. So they would let go of their belief system, of their inappropriate behavior. And so the 10th plague comes out, and God himself will carry out that plague of killing the firstborn. And in order to identify the Jewish homes, the Hebrew homes, blood is put on the doorpost. Now, we think about blood protecting the Hebrews. But that's not what it was, and that's not what was really important. God knows there's a Hebrew home inside. Why does God need to have a blood on the wall to know that there's Jews inside? It's ridiculous. God's omniscient. That's ridiculous. It's because the Hebrew families had to decide to make a conscious statement. We have faith. Because let's be honest, had they put blood on the doorposts and the next day the angel or God had not killed all the firstborn Egyptians, all those homes that had blood on them, the Egyptian soldiers would come and slaughter everybody. They acted on faith. That is the importance of the Passover. Not that God passed over us just willy-nilly because we had blood on our doorposts. No. The important part is that they made a step. See, Judaism is very much about action, as we've already talked about. Very first week, we talked about faith versus action. And Judaism is very, very much about action. The Hebrews had to become conscious enough that they were willing to have enough faith to slam some blood on their doorposts, realizing that if they were wrong, they would die. That's what was so important. They had to come to an emotional, psycho-emotional, spiritual maturity. They had to come to the place of understanding we have faith and we act on our faith. It's so easy to say you have faith when you don't have to act on it. It's important that we really do act on it and have faith. That's why my constant prayer to God is always give me more faith. Because that's really what, as much as I may have, that's what I always need. I need more of. For those times that are dark and for those times that are good, it doesn't matter. I need more faith. The emunah, the faith, that's the word for faith, opens up everything else. So they do this, and they are now thrown out very quickly. They want them out of Egypt. And they get out of Egypt. And let's go to chapter, the Exodus in chapter 13. And chapter 14, Pharaoh's heart changes. And he decides he's going to pursue those Hebrews. So he starts to pursue them. And he catches them, almost, at the Sea of Reeds. This is chapter 14. This is verse 9. Okay? And the children of Israel raised their eyes, and behold, Egypt was journeying after them. They were very frightened. The children of Israel cried out to God. They said to Moses, there were no graves in Egypt. You had to take us to die in the wilderness? This is the beginning of a very famous and constant pattern in Judaism called whining. They start off with whining to Moses. We couldn't die as slaves. Now you had to die out here in the wilderness by the sea. And so they're very scared. And Moses tells them to have faith. And we're taught that one man, a man named Nachshon, of the tribe of Benjamin, he has faith. And as the sun is about to set and the Egyptians are behind them, he walks into the sea. And he walks into the sea until the water is right up to below his nose, above his mouth. And he stands there waiting to be able to pass. And a shirako, a wind, comes. And in the morning, there are different midrashim on it. The sea is parted, or there's a big sandbar, or there's 12 sandbars, one for each tribe, or there's 600,000 sandbars, one for each person. But the point is now they can go across, depending on which midrash you look at. The sea is parted, they can walk on the land. And so they do. And when the Egyptians come and pursue them, the water crashes down on them because they can't stand on these sandbars, their chariots, their horses, etc. And on that day, God saved Israel from the hand of Egypt, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great hand that Hashem inflicted upon Egypt, and the men revered Hashem. They had faith in Hashem and in Moses, his servant. At that point, Miriam with the women pick up their timbrels and they dance and they sing. And we have this wonderful prayer. Michamocha ba'alim Adonai, who among you, who is like you unto you, O God, among the mighty? Michamocha neder b'kodesh, who is like you, great, awesome, holy? And they celebrate how great God is. So they're victorious and they celebrate how great God is, and that's good. But there's another midrash, a lot of these oral traditions that come in. Again, they're 2,000 years old, they've been written down. But the teaching is that at that moment, the angels started to rejoice. And God said to the angels, the work of my hands is being destroyed and you want to sing hymns of praise. Let's be clear. We need to destroy our enemies. They're attacking us. They need to be destroyed. If you go to war, you're going to war to win, not to lose, not to tie. What had to be done had to be done. But we don't need to rejoice in their demise. We can rejoice that God has saved us, but we don't need to rejoice in their demise. One of the painful things I experienced a number of years ago is, some of you know one of my passions is the occasional cigar, and I had walked into a cigar lounge. And as I walked out here in Westlake, and as I walked in, these guys are screaming like it's a football game. We're sitting there in the lounge. I walk in, they go, Rabbi, you got to see this. Well, it was when they bombed the terror tunnels that were coming into Israel. And so you see this picture, and you see these Arab terrorists coming in, and then you see the bomb, big bright explosion of the bomb, and all these young Arab terrorists are killed. And these guys are cheering like it's a UCLA USC football game. And I looked at them, and I won't repeat exactly what I said, but it was not complimentary. I said, you guys are fools. It says so clearly in the Talmud, in our Midrashim, it says so clearly that even God says, this is the work of my hands that is being destroyed. We don't rejoice in that. Better those people should have accepted Israel and become like we now having with Bahrain or with Dubai. Better that would have been than having to kill them. Yes, we had to kill them, but we don't have to rejoice in it. I looked at these guys and I said, do you realize with the 50 men we just killed, which had to be killed, let's be very clear about that. This is not justifying in any way that they did not need to be. They needed to be. They were going to attack Jews. They were going to attack Israelis. No question about it. However, we don't need to rejoice in their death because we just made 50 sets of parents lose a child. We just made 100 children lose their fathers. Better we should pray that they change how and who they are. They don't, and we have to do what we have to do. We have to do it. But we don't need to rejoice. And it's important to keep our compassion. That does not mean not having a boundary. That does not mean, I want to be really clear on this. We did what we needed to do, and it was the right thing, righteous thing to do. God, we see it right here. God destroys the Egyptian soldiers. But we don't need to rejoice in their death. Rather, we can rejoice that God saved us, that we're surviving. But we don't ever need to rejoice in our enemy's defeat. We need to defeat them, but we don't need to be happy that they died. It shows the lack of compassion or caring for God's creation. Because God loves everything that he created, even that which is wrong. And so we have this parting of the Sea of Reeds. We have this wonderful prayer, Michamocha ba'elim Adonai, as our enemies are defeated and drowned. I want to move forward now because we're going to start taking, again, more and more excerpts just to kind of look at patterns. So we get a foundation as we start to go into Talmud and other things and the rest of the Bible. I'd like everyone to please turn to chapter 17. Okay? Chapter 17 is this wonderful and powerful teaching about Amalek. Okay? This is verse 8. Amalek came and battled Israel and defeated him. And Moses said to Joshua, choose people for us and go do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses said to him, and to do battle with Amalek. Moses, Aaron, and Hur ascended to the top of the hill. Happened that when Moses raised his hand, Israel was stronger. When he lowered his hand, Amalek was stronger. Moses' hand grew heavy. They took a stone so that his hand kept his hands up. And Joshua weakened Amalek and its people with the sword's blade. So what's going on here? Moses is standing on a rock, right? And every time he goes up, everyone's face goes up. Oh, we know our strength is in God. And so they're strong. And then when his hands get tired, their heads go down. And they lose that ability to remember that their strength actually is in the hands of God always. So this happens, and ultimately we defeat Amalek. And then you have one of the most interesting and overlooked sentences in all of the Torah. We're now at chapter 17, verse 14. Hashem said to Moses, God says to Moses, write this as a remembrance in the book, recited in the ears of Joshua. I will surely erase the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Okay? For the hand is on the throne of God. Hashem maintains a war against Amalek from generation to generation. It doesn't say that God is going to maintain a war against the descendants of Amalek. It says against Amalek. This is very confusing. Moreover, why does it say God's going to maintain a war against anything or anyone? Now, if you want to explore this subject, there's a fabulous book. It's called Amalek, the Enemy Within. It's from my friend and teacher, Rabbi Elisha Shochet, exploring what this is really about. It's an entire book about this subject. It's a very, very valuable piece. Because there's something that's wrong here. It doesn't say God will maintain a war against the descendants of Amalek. It says against Amalek. Now, who is Amalek? Amalek is someone who attacks the Hebrews from behind. Who's at the behind of the camp? Who's the back of the camp? The old, the sick, the young, the infirm, the weak. So Amalek is this character, this archetype, if you want to use Jungian terms, who attacks the weak. We're ultimately taught that Haman is descended from Amalek. We're taught that all the persecutors of Hebrews, of Israel's, of Jews, are descended from Amalek. Amalek is the perpetrator, the persecutor. And you don't negotiate with him. You're at war with him. Always. Both the Amalek without and the Amalek within. The perpetrator, the persecutor that is without, that is external, our job as Jews is to battle them. We are to maintain a war against them. If they're perpetrating, if people say to me, there have been a number of articles that I've quoted on or written or been about why I have an issue with the organization Black Lives Matter. It has nothing to do with the idea of systemic racism, not systemic racism or anything like that. It has to do with the fact that if you look at the manifesto of Black Lives Matter, it says very specifically, it calls Israel an apartheid nation that commits genocide. They want all funding removed from it. They basically want Israel destroyed. Melina Abdullah, the head of BLM Los Angeles, is very specific. She's a self-proclaimed disciple of Louis Farrakhan, who calls Jews termites that must be exterminated. Melina Abdullah, when asked why did she pick that neighborhood for the riots, which was the Jewish neighborhood in June this past year, there's no federal building, there's no city hall. Her response was, I want the people there to feel pain. These are anti-Semites. They've declared war against us. Let's be clear. They're Amaleks. We need to be at war against that. Please do not misinterpret me. I'm not saying that there is or is not systemic racism or anything like that. What I am saying very clearly is the organization of BLM is despicable and has declared war on Jews and on Israel. Very clearly in their manifesto. You can find it easily enough online. If you can't, email me. I'll get you the references. It's very easily found. The Black Lives Matter and the Movement for Black Lives, their manifesto. So we have to be at war with Amalek that's external. But that's not even the most interesting part. The most interesting part is we all have an inner Amalek. The inner Amalek is the one that wants to persecute or perpetrate ourselves. The addiction that we have. The obsessions that we have. Whether it's because we're addicted to being angry or addicted to alcohol or a substance. That addiction is Amalek. I'll try and explain that further. Someone who's an alcoholic, if they're in recovery, they can't just have one drink, right? Doesn't make sense. They'll fall off the wagon. You do not negotiate with Amalek. You cut it off. If Amalek is your alcohol, then you don't drink any alcohol. If Amalek is your addiction to greed, then stop doing it. If your Amalek is your addiction to a substance or to anger or to rage, then you stop. You don't negotiate. You don't have a little heroin or a little alcohol or a little cocaine. You don't do any of it. You cut it off. And anyone in any 12-step program will be very clear with anyone else that they can't just go. We have a number of addiction recovery specialists in our community, and a few of them at least. And, they're all very clear. If you're in recovery, you can't have anything. Well, Amalek is the addict. Amalek is the addiction. And our lesson is when we see someone that is perpetrating, we cut it off. We do not relate to it. We defeat it. We do not have a little bit of negotiate, whether it's externally or internally. Again, I want to really recommend it. Really, if you find that an interesting concept, how we deal with addiction, how we deal with obsession, how we deal with any of that stuff, I really want to recommend this book, Amalek, the Enemy Within, by Rabbi Shochet. So let's continue on to chapter 19. This is in Parsha Yitro. They get to Sinai, where they're going to have the Ten Commandments. And they all get prepared. For 3 days they prepare. Okay? And actually, right before that, there's a beautiful, beautiful understanding that Jethro suggests to Moses, because Moses is very overwhelmed because he's being a judge as well as everything else. Jethro, being the wise father-in-law, says, you will surely become warm and out, you as well as this people that is with you, for this matter is too hard for you, and you can't do it alone. So heed my voice. I'm going to represent. I'm going to advise you. You be a representative of God. You convey the matters to God. He goes on, and he says, you shall discern from among the entire people men of accomplishment, God-fearing people, men of truth, and people who despise money, and you shall appoint them leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, and leaders of 10. They shall judge the people at all times. They shall bring the major matters to you, but every minor matter they shall judge. And so it shall be eased for you, and they shall bear with you. If you do this thing as God shall command you, then you will be able to endure with this entire people as well. You shall arrive at its destination of peace. And so this is what Moses does. He chooses men of accomplishment, appoints them heads of the people, leaders of thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. And they judge the people at all times. And if something was extra difficult, they'd bring it to Moses, and the minor thing they themselves would judge. Great line. First of all, this is the foundation of our court system in this nation. We have one court, but we can appeal until we finally get to the Supreme Court. That's first of all. Our framers of our Constitution, our founding fathers, were all extremely knowledgeable in the Hebrew Scriptures. In fact, many of them were educated and were fluent in Hebrew. And there's, I don't know how many of you realize this, that even our universities, Yale, among other ones, I think Dartmouth as well, but Yale, I know, has Hebrew in its official seal. Many of our framers and founders were very familiar with Hebrew scriptures. And they based our court system on this, the appellate court system, the judges of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. But it's something that I really think is important. Often, it says, you shall discern from among the entire people men of accomplishment, God-fearing people. That our judges should be scared, should be in fear of God. That's generally how it is interpreted and translated in the English. However, that's not what it says in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it says Yir'eh Elohim. Now, Yir'eh is often mistranslated as fear. It does not mean that. It means awe. A-W-E. Now, awe has a certain element of fear, but it's not about being fear. It's about being in awe that there's something greater than us. This is how all of our judges should be, isn't it? All of our politicians should be. All of our leaders, all of our rabbis, all of our clergy, all of our teachers. We should be in awe of God. When we lose that awe, we lose the values and systems and ethical behavior that we are taught in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in the Talmud, in all of our teachings. We lose the ethical behavior that is the foundation, actually, of this nation. Someone says you're looking at a candidate for local office or national office, and they say, Rabbi, what are the first things you look for? Well, the first two things I look for is, number one, how do they treat Jews in Israel? Because that's very important to me. And the other thing I look for is, do they seem, at least, does it feel that they are in awe of God? That they know that no matter how high they rise, there is something greater than them. It's a really important piece. And that's what makes a great judge. When the judge becomes an icon unto themselves, they miss a point. There have been many judges, both liberal and conservative, who have set themselves up as icons. I think they are the ultimate authority. But there have also been many judges, both conservative and liberal, who have chosen to say, you know what? This job of being on the Supreme Court, being a justice of the Supreme Court, is humbling. It's humbling that I have to serve these people and that I'm responsible to God, and they realize it. So this is one of the models for how we pick our judges, how we pick our people. And certainly, I think one of the important things that any judicial hearing, as we're looking at any justice, should they be voted on, whether it's a justice we vote on, or judge we vote on, whether it's a justice that's being appointed, we need to look that they truly are people of accomplishment. They are in awe of God. They are people of truth who cannot be bought. And those are who we should make our judges, our justices. So they get to Sinai. And there's this wonderful piece that they prepare for a few days. They prepare. And then in verse 20, we have the Ten Commandments. Let's talk about these 10 commandments. First of all, they're actually not 10. There's 13 sentences. You may remember from the first class that in Gematria, in Jewish numerology, 13 is the number of love. Okay? It's the number of love. Because if you spell the word for love in Hebrew, ahava, it spells, the numerical value of that word is 13. Aleph is 1, Hey is 5, Vet is 2, Hey is 5. 13. These, more than commandments, these are statements of love. And here's the piece to understand. This entire document of the Tanakh, all of it, especially Torah, and most especially the Ten Commandments, is a ketubah. It's the ketubah between God and the people of Israel, God and Jews, God and the Hebrews. It is our ketubah, our wedding contract. Shavuot, the holiday we celebrate during the summertime, where we study all night till dawn, and we read these words. And there is a traditional study of reading something called Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Unfortunately, it's never been translated in English. I assembled about a quarter to a third of it and did an English translation so that our community can study it all night on Shavuot. Those of you who study with me know what I'm talking about. It is little excerpts from everything to remind us that this is the ketubah between us and God. It's very clear in these 10 commandments. So let's look at this. These aren't anchors to hold us down. These are not kites to help us fly higher. These are specific love statements. Maimonides says, if you find hate, anger in the Torah, it's you, it's not the Torah. Nowhere is that truer than here. These are statements of love. So let's look at them. Before that, let's look at how a couple falls in love. So we've got David and Susie. And David and Susie meet at a party. And David sees Susie at a party, and he sees her and goes, I want to go get to know that girl. Some of you may relate this to this, or some of you women may relate it the other way. And so David comes up to Susie, and the first thing he says is, hi, my name's David. And she says, hi, my name's Susie. That's the first thing you do in any contract is identify the parties. First thing you do when you're building a relationship, say, who are you? What's the very first statement? God says, very, very clearly, Anochi Yud He Vav He. Elohecha, your God. I am Hashem. I am Yud He Vav He. I am Adonai. And I belong to you and you belong to me. Now, what's the second thing? Going back and forth here. What's the second thing that David and Susie are going to talk about? Susie's going to say, well, David, what do you do? And David's going to say, well, I do this, I do that. I'm a student. I'm a car mechanic. I'm anything else. He's not going to say that he's a rabbi, because if he does, she's going to run away. He's going to say whatever he's going to say. In Los Angeles, he's going to say, I'm an actor, but I'm moonlighting as a waiter, whatever it may be. But he's going to say, this is what I do. So let's look at the statement, what God says. God says, my name, I am Yud He Vav and He, the four-letter name. What do I do? I am the one who has taken you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. So now he's identified himself. Kind of sounds like beginning of a relationship, doesn't it? The next one, the next commandment is the commandment that is always mistranslated, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I've never seen an English translation that's accurate. So we're going to study them both. It says here, you shall not recognize the gods of others in my presence. That goes on about that. Well, let's talk about this relationship. Let's first understand the relationship with David and Susie. So David and Susie, now they're a couple. They're engaged, they're going out, they're married, and they go to a party together. You always know if the couple is happy or not, don't you? Because if they could be on opposite sides of the room, but David's constantly looking at Susie. Susie's constantly checking in with David. You see it on their face, on their punim. You also see it if, God forbid, they're not on their face. You see if they're not such a happy couple. They could be right next to each other, and David's looking at the blonde over there going like this. They're not such a happy couple. Susie's looking at the guy over there. They're not so happy. You see it on the face. Always. That's what you say. My grandma used to say the eyes are the windows of the soul. So I don't know where the saying came from. I don't think it was hers originally. What does it actually say here? It does not actually say, you shall not recognize the gods of others in my presence. Here's what it actually says, word for word. Lo yihye lacha, there shall not be for you, or on you, with you, Elohim acharim, other gods, al panai, on your face. It doesn't say you're not going to recognize the gods of others in my presence. It literally says, Lo yihye, there shall not be lacha for you, Elohim acharim, other gods, al panai, like punim, on your face. It's a love statement. And it goes on with these rules for the relationship. All of us in our relationship have rules. I have rules with Allison, my wife. You all have rules with your own husbands and wives. This is okay. This is not okay. And so we have these 10 commandments, these 10 statements. But they're a wedding contract. And the first 5 are all about just how we relate with God, the spirituality. And the next ones have to do with what you can do in this physical world, because everything is part of God. And our parents honoring your father and your mother, part of the understanding is that our fathers and our mothers are our initial bridges to God. We understand God as babies and as young children because of how we interact with our parents. And so the next ones are all in this physical world, very much in this physical world. When it says on number 13, lo tirtzach, it does not mean you shall not kill. It means don't murder. It's a very specific type of murder. All of these next 5 commandments are all done in secret. They're all done in the shadows. Don't murder. Don't steal. It doesn't say don't steal like Jean Valjean, but don't steal in the dark. Don't commit adultery. Don't bear false witness. Don't covet. Now, these 10 commandments are repeated again in the book of Deuteronomy, and they are slightly different. We'll see it when we get to the book of Deuteronomy. But as an example, if we look at first chapter 20, verse 8, here it says, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. But in Deuteronomy, it says, protect the Sabbath day. So we have remember, Zachor. We have protect, Shomer. Now, Jews, we always add, we don't take away. So since one place it says Shomor, protect, and one place it says Zachor, remember, we light a candle for each one of those. So the 2 candles you light on Shabbos, one is to remember, one is to protect, because it says it differently. If you think of L'chadodi, if you know the song, right? Shamor ve'zachor bedibur echad. In Shamor, to protect, to remember, bedibur echad in as one thing together. Okay. So these are the essence of our ketubah. These 10 statements. The first half being how we need to work and how we need to interact with God directly and in our spiritual understanding, even with our parents. And the next 5 being about how we need to act in this physical world. We don't murder. That does not mean you cannot kill. It means you do not murder. Okay? You don't steal in the secret. You don't covet. You don't bear false witness. Things like that. And this becomes the essence of the contract. And this whole document is the whole contract, which is why we study all of it on Shavuot, which is our wedding night with God. We'll get to that later. So we have these 10 commandments, and immediately after these, in chapter 23, we have this concept, 23:10 or 23:14, that there are 3 pilgrimage festivals, 3 festivals that we would need to make a pilgrimage to where our community, our spiritual center is. These are the festivals of the Passover, of Sukkot that we just finished, and of Shavuot. It's interesting. When the temple was built in Jerusalem, every Jew needed to go to the temple for those 3 festivals, for Passover, for Shavuot, and for Sukkot. And if you look at Christian scriptures, you find, although it says it's a spring holiday, the people gather and they place down palms for Jesus when he comes in, Palm Sunday. Well, the holiday where we harvest palms is actually Sukkot, not Pesach. So there's a decent argument to be made that it actually didn't happen in spring, it happened in fall, if you did go back. And there's a decent argument to be made that the holiday was Sukkot, not Passover. But the whole mythology of this Jesus and Passover come together nicer than Sukkot. But if he came back, and if he came back for a festival and they had palm fronds, it's probably Sukkot, just as an aside. So these 3 festivals are commanded to us. And God again promises us the land. And then we have, actually before we get to that, I want to read a very, very important line. We go to chapter 23, and we go to verse 10, I think. Somewhere in there. 3 times. Okay. Here we go. In verse 19, it says, you shall not cook a kid in the milk of its mother. From this line, which is repeated 3 times in the Torah, you should not cook a kid in the milk of its mother, we get the separation of milk and meat at the same meal as part of our laws of kashrut. Kasher means to be fit, to be acceptable. And so mixing milk and meat or not. Now, it doesn't say you can't have a cheeseburger. It says you can't boil a calf in the milk of its mother. But our rabbis have interpreted in multiple different ways that ultimately you can't profit from it, you can't cook it, you can't eat it in the same meal. same time frame. There's actually a great story that I heard years and years ago from Rabbi Joseph Ehrenkrantz in Connecticut. I was at a conference there, and he had a great line. He said, I'm sure he didn't make it up, but he had a great line. He said, God says to Moses, don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. And Moses says, okay, so I can't have milk and meat anywhere near each other? God says, Moses, don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. That's all. Moses says, okay, so I can't have any milk product with any meat product at the same time. Moses, don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. Okay, so I can't have milk, anything made from dairy, and anything that's touched by dairy, anything that's been touched by meat. I can't have them for 3 hours apart from each other. God says, fine, Moses, have it your own way. So this is the rabbinic interpretation on the actual law. Okay? And it does not say what kind of meat. It says basar, it says meat, which is typically referring to cows or animals like that. We'll come later on when we talk about kashrut. We'll talk about why chicken is considered meat. Let's keep going. So they go up, and Moses goes up, and Moses, we're going to turn to chapter 31 at this point. So if you could please turn to chapter 31, verse 12. Now, here's one of the secrets of Torah. God always gives the remedy before the sickness. Always. Always. Physical, spiritual, mental sickness, God has already given the remedy. The cure for coronavirus already exists in some way, somehow, because God always, always creates the remedy before the sickness. And we're going to have the great spiritual sickness happen in a moment, but God gives us a remedy beforehand. I wrote a Torah commentary for the Jewish Journal once on this. God says, you must observe my Sabbaths. It is a sign between me and you for your generations. It is holy to you. The Sabbath is the cure for the spiritual imperfection that we're about to study, the golden calf. The Sabbath is the cure for any spiritual imperfection. And it's not, that doesn't mean that you got to go turn off all electricity. It doesn't, if you want, that's great. I recommend it. It's very powerful. But the concept of taking one day, saying, God, as my friend Rabbi Arthur Gross Schaefer likes to say, God sends a note saying, thank you for all the good work you've done all week, but this one day I can rule the world without your help. Taking one day and giving it up to God. I remember hearing many, many years ago, hearing the great cellist Piatigorsky. He was playing cello, and he said, I practice every day. 6 days, I practice my scales. I practice for me. The 7th day, I just go on my balcony and I play for God. This is Shabbat. Take that day. Give it up to God. There's a book called The Seventh Telling. It's an autobiographical account from a guy who was, at one point in his life, he was on a submarine ship in the Navy, and he couldn't take a day off for Sabbath. So what he decided is that since he's awake 14 hours a day working, he's going to take 2 hours a day, and that'll be his Shabbat, since he can't just take out Friday night to Saturday night. So every day, he would take 2 hours, and that's his Shabbat time. He'd study Torah, he'd do whatever. We got to give a seventh of who we are, ideally on Shabbos, to God. It makes our world better. More than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. Rabbi Heschel. And so God gives us this remedy of the Sabbath. And then right after that, Moses receives the commandments. But he's been up there for a while. And because it was one of those months where you couldn't really tell where the new moon was or not, if we turn to chapter 32, we have the greatest single sin the Jews have ever done. After all the miracles they've seen, they go to Aaron and they say, make for us gods that will go before us. We do not know what became of this man Moses. So Aaron tries to stall them out. He gets the gold they have, because remember the Egyptians gave him all this gold. He says all these different things, and he creates a molten calf, a golden calf. And Aaron actually says, a festival for Hashem tomorrow. So Aaron's really staying very true to God. He's just trying to keep them under control, because they're going nuts. And they start to have all the different sounds and the different behavior that they have. And God gets a little bothered by this. And God says to Moses, I've seen this people, it is a stiff-necked people. Desist from me, let my anger flare up against them. I shall annihilate them, and I shall make of you a great nation. Let's recap for a minute. Well, let's go back when we talked about Abraham. Abraham, we learned a couple of weeks ago, right? Abraham, we learned, was willing to fight for Sodom because he knew it was right. Abraham passed these tests. Abraham was constantly fighting for what was right. It's only when he failed, when he stopped fighting for what is right, that God stopped speaking to him. God is constantly testing all of us in one way or another. Always. Always. So God says, Moses, I'm going to destroy all the people because they're just Meshuggahs. They've created this golden calf. And Moses is now going to do what Abraham did with God and what every great sage is willing to do for his people. He argues against God himself. We are now on chapter 32, verse 11. And Moses is pleading to God. Why, Hashem, should your anger flare up against your people whom you've taken out of the land of Egypt with great power and a strong hand? Why should Egypt say the following, that with evil intent did he take them out? This is a fallacious argument. The Egyptians aren't going to know if God killed them all and made a great nation out of Moses or not. But Moses is arguing, which is what God wants to see. Moses continues. Remember, for the sake Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants to whom you swore by yourself, you told them, I shall increase your offspring. Another fallacious argument. Because if God did destroy all the Hebrews and made every Jew come from Moses, since Moses was descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God's promise would still be true. But Moses did what a leader is supposed to do. He defended his people, to do what is right, even when it is difficult, and when they're not acting right. And so God reconsiders the evil. Moses turns. He goes down with the 2 tablets. He goes down. Joshua thinks there's a battle going on. There's not. And this is now in chapter 32, verse 19. He throws down the tablets. And this happens. The tablets are destroyed. This is the great sin of the Jewish people. That even with all the miracles they experienced, they still did the golden calf. It's a beautiful midrash, by the way, that Moses doesn't actually throw them down. What happens is he's holding them, and the letters have been inscribed by God, and so they were so holy. And when they saw the evil that people were doing, they flew off the tablets, and Moses couldn't hold the stones anymore, and they fell down. This is the great sin. All sins stem from this one, we are taught. So Moses prays for a day, and afterwards he goes back up, and he waits, and he comes down with his second set of tablets, and he brings them down to the people, and they accept the second set of tablets. And here we learn something valuable. We learned something we just observed only a few weeks ago, a month ago, because we're on Mar Cheshvan. When Moses goes up, we've committed the great sin. And it takes him the time to ask to be forgiven, and then God dictates to him, and he writes the tablets again. And he brings them down. Those tablets are the sign of forgiveness, right? Think about it again as that couple image, that married couple. Well, they got married on Shavuot, they got married, they got everything. And then very quickly, in the midst of their honeymoon, one partner's cheating on the other. And after a certain amount of time, they forgive each other, and now their relationship can even be stronger in some ways. They're ready. In the same way, we cheated on God with molten calf. And God forgives us by giving us a second set of the 10 Commandments. The second set is the ultimate sign of forgiveness, and it is given to us on the 10th day of the month of Tishrei. This is the day we call Yom Kippur. This is why Yom Kippur is so holy. Because it is the same day that God ultimately forgave us for the greatest sin we ever did. It's why it says Masechta Yoma in the Talmud. It says that the day itself is holy. That if you recognize it as Yom Kippur and you ask God for forgiveness for the things you have done against yourself, against God, God automatically forgives you. This is the sign, ultimate forgiveness. And it happens on Yom Kippur. Okay? So we have this forgiveness. And we have this amazing phrase that happens in chapter 34, verse 6. God says to Moses, Moses says to God, Moses says to God, I want to see your face. God says, Moses, nobody can see my face and lives, but here's what I'm going to do because I know you so lovingly and we're so close. He takes Moses and he puts him in the cleft of a rock. And then he passes by in front of Moses. And Moses sees the back of God. Todd actually sees God's tefillin knot up for his tefillin harosh. Moses sees God pass. And when he sees God pass, he calls out the essence, the quality. The 13, remember 13 is the number of love. The 13 qualities of God. Because that's really someone's name. Someone's real name is a description of who they are. And he calls out the full name. Adonai, Adonai, Orachum Vechanu, Erech Apayim. The 13 attributes, the 13 midot. And we're taught them as a community when we chant these 13 midot. God has made it such that God will answer our prayers. So we call out these 13 midot. It is again found in chapter 34, verse 6. About God's compassion and graciousness, preserver of kindness and forgiver of iniquity. And so Moses really understands the essence of who God is and shares it again through Torah. And this becomes part of our regular liturgy. Now, as we go through this book of Shemot, I'd like to do one more thing before we call it a night. We start going into a number of different things starting to deal with the children of Aaron, the descendants of Aaron. We finish Shemot, we finish the book of Exodus, where the glory of God fills the tabernacle where the commandments are, and when the cloud was raised from the tabernacle, the children would embark on journeys. If the cloud would not rise up, they would stay there. And this was something all the Hebrews could see. Chazak, chazak, v'nisazeh. So the next book is called Vayikra. So we've had. Hold on a second. So we've had now the first book, which was Bereshit, which deals a lot with the world creation up through Joseph. But we then have the book Shemot, meaning names, which deals a lot with Moses and we're slaves and the whole process of the Exodus up through the giving of the Ten Commandments. And beyond that, the next book we're going to have is this book called Vayikra. Shemot means names. Vayikra is a double entendre. It literally means, and he called. Now, in English, we call it, or I guess from the Greek, but it's called Leviticus, is how most people know it, because it's very much about the Levites, the descendants of Levi, the son of Jacob. It's very much about the responsibilities of the Levites. Now, Moses is a Levite, and his brother Aaron is called a Kohen, meaning a priest. And Aaron is taught, or God says to Moses that Aaron and his descendants are going to be the ones that are really leading all the rituals. Okay? And you become a Kohen because your father was a Kohen. And it's actually on the genetic code. It can be tracked. It's something that apparently is only on the Y side, the male side. But the next book is very much about the priestly obligations. A lot of it is about that. When we study multiple authorship theories of academics, which we'll do in a week or two, the idea is that this is actually a different author, if you believe in multiple authorship, what they call the priestly author, the P. But the book traditionally taught has been written from God. The Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, is this amazing book about the responsibilities of the Levites. I really like the Hebrew name a lot better, Vayikra, because it means and he called. And it's a double entendre that God calls to us and how the priests, how we call to God. Okay? And there's a lot of ritual in it, and what you do with sacrifices, and what you do with this and that and this and that for the people. It's very much what the book is about. But I want to look at a couple of things in it that I think are very, very important. First, if we can turn to chapter 11 in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, if you have this in front of you. I know we're going quickly, but again, I want to get through Torah, get through the Bible, so we can really start studying other things as well. But this is the foundation of everything, so we really take more time with Torah than anything else. So if we go to chapter 11, we have this idea of animals that are allowed to be eaten and animals that are not allowed to be eaten. And I think this will be a good topic to spend a few minutes on, and we'll end the class with this, because people say, why should I keep kosher? So it says here, these are the creatures you may eat from the animals that are upon the earth. You must have a split hoof, which is completely separated into double hooves, and that brings up its cud, and let's choose its cud. Those you may eat. But we shall not eat from those that bring up their cud or that have split hooves. The camel, for it brings up its cud, but its hoof is not split. So you can't eat it. You can't eat the hyrax. It brings up its cud, but its hoof is not split. The hare brings up its cud, but the hoof is not split. It is unclean. The pig, its hoof is split. Its hoof is completely separated, but does not chew its cud. Okay? So it says that it must have a split hoof and chew its cud. And then it goes on, as we get to verse 9, about everything in the water. The bottom line is it must have fins and scales. Okay? If it doesn't have fins and scales, you can't eat it. And then it goes through a description in verse 13 of all sorts of different birds. Okay? If I hear one more person say kashrut is about health, I just want to slap them when people say that, because it's based on ignorance. That is not why. And it has nothing to do with cleanliness. Nothing. Because if, in fact, kosher animals were cleaner, then a raccoon would be kosher. Because if you've ever seen a raccoon in the wild, they get their food, they go to the water source, they wash their hands, they wash their food, they wash their hands, they eat their food, they wash their hands. Yet a raccoon is not kosher. A chicken is about as dirty an animal as exists, but chicken are kosher. As opposed to an eagle or an owl, which are not kosher. So, there are two types of laws in the Torah, a hoch and a mishpat. A law that is easy to understand. Don't kill, don't murder anybody. Law that's harder to understand. Eat these animals, don't eat these animals. But here's the piece to understand. More than anything else, when we do it because God says it. But beyond that, because for many of us, we are both spiritual in our outlook on the universe, but we also are rational-minded people. So whether I'm a rational spiritualist or a spiritual rationalist depends on the day, it depends on the moment, but the reality is that we want to understand things more deeply. Kashrut is a great, great, great place to understand that. Great place to understand that. So let's look at animals, okay? The concept is, I'm going to erase all this stuff. The concept is, we'll look at it this way at least, that there are really three types of animals in the world: predators, scavengers, and grazers. Okay? There's predators, there's scavengers, and there's grazers. The next concept as well is that we can embody the energy of that which we eat. Now, I will tell you that I grew up having Sunday crab cakes with my brother. God rest his soul. Okay? The restaurant on Ventura Boulevard in Encino. He was older than me. He was 12 years older than me. And he used to take his little brother and would have crab cakes. Okay? Because when I heard about this kashrut, I said, this is stupid. You can't tell me that one animal's cleaner than another. You can't tell me in today's world that it makes a difference. But then I learned this. And it changed everything. There are three types of animals: predators, scavengers, and grazers. And the idea is that you embody the energy of that which you eat. Well, I can get behind that. I always could get behind it. You know, if an animal was killed in fear, that's probably not an animal that is going to be very healthy for me. Moreover, if I can embody the different energy of what I eat, I'll buy into that. And by the way, I want to just put something out there. Our laws of what animals you can eat and cannot eat are temporary. We understand through the Midrash that eventually we will all be vegetarian. Okay? But until we can get to being vegetarian, at least we're going to put boundaries on our appetites. Right? So all the ideas, eventually, we're not going to eat any animal, because why would you eat anything that has been gifted with the breath of life? But until we can all get to the point, at least let's put some curbs on our food, and let's try and be clear what we're eating. So let's take a look at some of the animals. So if we think of predators, we think of lions and tigers and bears and oh my's, right? We think of any predator like that. When we think of birds that are predators, we think of eagle. We think of owl, which is the night eagle, hawk. If we think of scavengers, well, okay, some scavengers. Hyena, right? Rats. These are some of the scavengers. Coyotes are arguably predators or scavengers. We think of different animals. We think of birds that are scavengers. Well, we think of raven. We think of crows. Right? If we think of grazers, well, if we think of four-legged, if we think of land animals, we think of cow and deer and goat. We think of chickens and turkeys. If we think of fish and all of these, well, predators, we think of shark. That's an example. Scavengers, any of the shellfish. Catfish. Grazers, trout. Salmon. Herring. Seeing a pattern already? God describes it here for us. God describes it by saying a cloven hoof and chewing its cud. God describes it by saying fins and scales. God describes it by saying these birds and not these other birds. But if we split across everything, we're looking at all the different examples you can make, we find that the only animals that both chew their cud and have cloven hoofs are the grazing animals. The only fish that have fins and scales are the grazing fish, and so on. I should probably put down raccoons as well, the scavengers. Right? If the scavengers don't have fins and scales, if they're fish, they don't have chewing their cud and split hooves. If they're predators, they don't chew their cud and have split hooves, or they don't have fins and scales. So if we take all this apart and we investigate, we find that the animals that are allowed are the grazers, and it is an ethical statement. I am not going to be a predator. I'm not going to prey upon others. I'm not going to be a scavenger. I'm not going to take other people's leftovers. I'm going to be like the grazers. I'm going to work with my tribe and take what God provides me with an open hand. Receive the Kabbalah, receive what God provides me with an open hand. Now I tell you, as I said, I grew up eating crab cakes Sunday mornings. When I learned this, I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a year. I'm not going to keep milk and meat separate. I'm not to that place yet. I wasn't to that place yet. It's a long time ago. That's a long time ago. But I'm only going to, and I'm not going to ensure that it's kosher cow. But I'm only going to eat kosher animals, and I'm not going to eat any scavengers. I'm not going to eat any predators. And I'm going to do it for a year and see how I feel. At the end of the year, I felt qualitatively different. Now, whether that's because I wanted to feel different or because it had a real difference, the bottom line is I felt different. And so I never ate treif again. It was worth the 1 year exploration, and that changed my life. And then eventually I did separation of milk and meat, etc. By the way, the reason we don't combine milk and meat is because meat is the ultimate symbol of death. It's dead meat. Milk is the ultimate symbol of new life, right? And you don't combine milk and meat. You don't combine new life and death. Separations. So the kashrut laws that we find in chapter 11, the forbidden animals, the allowed animals. And we believe all animals are sacred. There's a book called Perek Shira, a wonderful, wonderful book, which said if we read it every day, we have an automatic place in heaven. It says that in the Talmud. It's a beautiful edition done by Art Scroll. And that talks about the songs of each animal, of lions and of deers, of all the different animals, kosher and non-kosher. We treasure all of them. They all have a gift. They all have teachings for us. We are, people think Judaism is monotheistic. It's actually not, nor is it pantheistic. We're actually monistic, meaning that we see God in everything. Okay. But it's it's a deeper conversation, but it's a much more accurate description of who we are. We experience God in everything with but one God. Or the essence of it. So there's value in all these animals, right? The meditation that we have when we sing Yedid Nefesh is that our soul is a deer that we are dancing with, much like the Yaqui Indians with the Maso Puikam, the deer dance and the deer songs. So all animals have value, but the only ones we're allowed to eat are the grazers. And it's a great statement that we shall not prey upon others, nor shall we take their leftovers. We shall receive what God provides for us. And we shall do it with open hands, open hearts, and as a group, as a tribe, because all those animals also work together in that way. I think that's a good place to leave us for tonight. Next week, we'll start off with forbidden relationships and Torah and things like that. We have Shabbat services on Friday evening. They will be both live in our sanctuary, as well as they will be streamed online. You may get another email with a different streaming access as we're working on doing all of this. Orlando and David are working very hard on making sure we have proper access directly through our website as opposed to going through some of these other systems to the platforms. We want to make sure there's no glitches. So I hope that helps. If you have a question, then type it in here, email it to me. If you have comments, do that. And we will continue studying. If you haven't seen the classes before this, please take your time and see all the classes before this so we can all be on the same page as we continue studying. As I said, this will take us 8-9 months, whatever it may be. We typically end somewhere around May, June. And we will have gone through a whole lot. We'll actually gone through that entire page, entire poster, but we've gone through from the beginning of creation all the way to 21st century. Kabbalah, Mussar, all sorts of things. Especially we'll spend a fair amount of time on Talmud, which is the basis of practical Judaism. It's based on this, but then it becomes that. So thank you for being good to me and letting me say these things with you and share them with you. And if you still are wondering, maybe try only eating grazers for the next month or 3 months and see how it makes you feel. Again, I hope to see you soon. I hope to see you on Shabbos on Friday night.